Welcome back to the 2023 ICMA Equity Summit. My name is Laura Savage, and I'm the Senior Program Manager here at ICMA. And if you've been through all the sessions with us today, this is an easy one to know. But for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, just a few reminders. And we encourage you to participate with your camera on. Body language is language, and it's very helpful. However, you prefer to keep your camera off, that's fine. We've got that chat feature for you that we very, very much encourage you to use as well. When you're not asking a question, please place yourself on mute. Our speakers will take questions from the audience. And so to raise your hand, you can use the little raise hand reaction. That is part of the Zoom functionality. At the end of this session, there will be a one question survey that will pop up on your screen. We appreciate you answering that question as it helps us plan for future events. And now, lastly, I would like to welcome everyone, our speakers and our moderator, Juniper. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today, and to ICMA for allowing us to organize this session intended to help you connect the dots from history to implementation. I'm your moderator, head of partner engagement here at Leadership Connect, and former ICMA leadership team member. So for those of you who I recall during my time at ICMA, 7 years served there, nice to see you all again. During today's conversation, we hope to provide you with some actionable solutions to help you advance your DEI initiatives. Those solutions are going to include insights on diversity in public sector today, personal lessons learned as pioneers in DEI. We hope to be able to help you encourage community and elected official engagement, and finally, building some of those partnerships for success. Before we get started with the panel discussion, I wanted to just share a couple quick findings from the Leadership Connect data tied to last year's session, where we presented some interesting stories about how leadership ended up in their roles despite the challenges faced during their journeys. Today, what we know is that about 26% of city and county managers tracked in Leadership Connect are women, and it's similar findings for elected officials. What we did notice that the lever was moved a bit this year, about 2% up from last year. We are tracking over 114 cities and counties tracked that have DEI-focused positions, folks like our panelists today, Danya. And finally, if you're looking at how your community is tracking with DEI positions, we know that about 70% of the top positions in HR in cities tracked by Leadership Connect are women, and that's in line with the industry trend. But we all know that diversity isn't just about women. Since 1974, ICMA has been confronting the status quo of gender, racial, and ethnic diversity. As a core belief and Envision ICMA, the association has been committed to ensuring that local governments are inclusive and mirror the diversity in their communities. The stories you're going to hear today will touch on all aspects from those personal experiences to organizational implementation. I'm honored to present this panel to you today, each of who have made history in their careers really as pioneers in their communities. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through some very brief introductions, and then we'll dive right into a few questions for our panelists. So we're going to kick it off with Jane Campbell. Jane comes to us today as Cleveland's first female mayor. She's who inspired me to bring this session to light. As the CEO of one of our client organizations, looking at history of Capitol Hill, we have Jane here to make her introduction, and we're looking forward to hearing her thoughts.
Well, thank you, Juniper, and welcome. We're glad to be with you virtually. One of the questions that everybody always asks at these kind of things is, how do we as administrators deal with elected officials? I'm the token elected official on this panel. And let me just tell you one thing. Elected officials love to make promises and keep them. So the question is, how do you deal with DEI in that context? I spent 21 years as an elected official in Ohio. It was before DEI was a phrase, but for me, it's been a way of life. When I was elected to the Ohio House in 1984, most of you had, your parents hadn't met. I was one of 9 women in the 99-member House, the youngest woman ever elected at the age of 31. The stories could fill this entire hour. So let me just tell you 2. In my second term, I got pregnant on purpose by my husband 2 years after we were married. Ohio had never had a pregnant legislator. It was quite a topic. The speaker called the Ohio State Hospital to put them on notice that they had this pregnant person in their midst. I got asked the dumbest question ever asked by a reporter. At the 8 months pregnant, reporter, mic in hand, says to me, "How did you get pregnant?" On air, television. I said, "The regular way." Follow-up question, "What do you intend to do with the child?" "Love it and raise it." At which point I said, "I don't really want to know what your third question is. I think we've done enough." Since then, a number of women served, had children, and proved that, lo and behold, we could use our brains and our uteruses at the same time. I earned the honor of serving on the Finance Committee. Again, 33 members, 3 women. We're debating the biennial budget in the late 1990s, and the Secretary of Education comes before us with this urgent plea to fund a distinguished scholar program to provide our students with STEM education so that they'll be ready for the year 2000 and beyond. And I leaned over to one of my sister legislators and said, "Okay, are you going to ask or am I?" And she raised her hand and says, "How do you intend to be sure that the female students are included?" You should have seen this guy smile. He grins from ear to ear. And he said, "I knew either you or Campbell were going to ask that question. And let me tell you, we have 9 scholars, 3 are African-American, 3 are women." They had designed the whole program because they knew we would have those questions. And so if you think about what's the impact of having diverse people on the decision-making panels, it means everything. So our very presence changed their behavior before we opened our mouths. As I became an executive with hiring authority, I said, we're going to have an administration that looks like Cleveland. Cleveland is a city that is majority African-American. We have a Hispanic population, and department by department, we searched for leaders, and I insisted that we search for qualified candidates who represented the diversity of our city, and we found them. I simply wouldn't sign off on the hires until I was sure that the search for diversity was real. I used the power I had. Our cabinet, when we announced it, reflected the diversity of the city. We had the first person to take his oath on a Hindu book of prayer. We had an Asian director of the airport. We had several African Americans. We had a Hispanic leader, many women, Black and white, all ages. And because they were selected, not because of their politics, but because of their competence, the guy who was the president of city council, who beat me in the election, little turkey, kept 60% of my cabinet because they were good people, qualified people. We tracked it. We reported on the employment of Cleveland residents in all of our projects. We reported on the engagement of women and minority businesses as contractors. So I will submit to you that the best way to deal with diversity, equity, inclusion, as it's now called, is to claim it, to track it, and to be transparent.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much for sharing that bit of history and that impact that you had made. Our next panelist for introductions is Noelle. Noelle comes to us as county manager from Adams County, Colorado, also part of the LGHN network. We're looking forward to your introduction.
Thank you, Juniper. I was trying to write notes to one up Jane, but it's not going to work. But I will share some stories and some highlights that I'm proud of, since we're talking about statistics and tracking and claiming and measuring how the needle's being moved. One of the things that I'm proud of most recently is while I was the city manager of Brownsville, Texas, Deep South Texas, one of my team members, she was my deputy city manager, was qualified, competent. To Jane's point, she was the best fit for the team that was being built there, but she was positioned to have an opportunity to be a city manager. That's a governing body decision. But I'm proud that in retrospect, she had the opportunity to compete and was selected and became the first female city manager in the 170-year history of Brownsville that has deep roots going back to the Civil War. And I think that is where we can do things, and we are in positions of authority and responsibility to help move the needle. And I can say that we've made some movement on that 18% of female public administrators through people like Helen, who are now at the helm of larger cities, her in Texas. That's kind of been the story of my career for almost 15 years. It's been one of applying the reformist spirit and ethos of our progressive forefathers. I think for me, when I signed up for being in local government, it was about making a difference and making an impact. I made a complete change from being an attorney that was going to focus on immigration and equal rights, since I am a first-generation migrant myself. And I learned of this platform, and I've taken full responsibility and seized every opportunity. I took the plunge at 25, being city manager of my first community at that point, and just never looked back. And in this time frame, I was a part of the first minority team for Taylor, Texas, which is a suburb of Boston. The first Black city manager and the first Latino ACM came in at the same time. Years back now, I was also the first city administrator in a small town in the coastal bend area of Texas, which is Corpus Christi. They had never had a city manager. We made that transition during my tenure. And speaking of diversity, I would also say that in my tenure, I've kind of run the gamut from rural to urban to suburban communities. And now here with Adams County, we boast all of that. We have a very urban western, southwestern corridor, kind of a suburban central part of the county. And then we have that rural eastern part of Adams that is still in this path of growth and progress. But ultimately, I think a lot of what we need to do in our profession is face the issues that we have in our communities and our profession with courage and with that reformer mentality. That is what made our profession what it is. That is what's keeping us strong for the 100-year plus that we've been in existence. And that's what's going to keep us relevant, in my mind, as we tackle issues of DEI or otherwise. It is going to take us continuing to ignite that reformer in us so that we can make change.
Great. Thank you, Noelle. What great context here. And, I'm hearing another theme here, that those youngins out there. So many of you have been the pioneers as the next gen as well. So our next panelist for a quick intro is Karen Pinkos. I always like to refer to my first meeting of Karen back when we were nice and young, and Twitter was emerging as kind of where we were meeting our members. And I posted my first tweet under Leadership Connect's handle, and she was my first retweeter. I was thinking I did what I needed to do today. My message was retweeted. And so here is Karen.
Yeah, that was back when Twitter was cool. Anyway, hi everyone, I'm Karen Pinkos. I'm the city manager for the city of El Cerrito, and I'm looking at the participant list and I see a lot of familiar names. So hey everyone I know on that list, and hey everyone I don't know. So I am, again, the city manager of El Cerrito, California, which is a small city in the middle of the amazing San Francisco Bay Area. I have been with the city for 22 years. I started out as a tiny baby assistant to the city manager, was promoted to assistant in 2006 and was appointed as city manager in 2018. I come from Michigan. I grew up in the Detroit area. And so it's a wonderful community, really proud to be here. We've always, our community has always seen itself as a very welcoming, inclusive community, whether ethnicity, demographics, LGBTQ. We really pride ourselves on that. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Oh, sorry, go Blue. I'm a Spartan fan, but that's okay. I like you anyway. Anyway, so, sorry, had to go there. So as far as being a bit of a pioneer, I am the first permanent woman city manager in El Cerrito's history. We were incorporated in 1917. There was a window of an interim manager who was a woman, but I'm the first permanent one. And for those of you who may recognize me from other stuff, I also have served in ICMA leadership. I was ICMA president in 2019. And at that point, I was only the fourth in, I think, 105 years at that point, only the fourth woman ever appointed president. And I'm happy to say that we have the next incoming president-elect is a woman. So we'll finally have 6. Still not where we need to be, kids, but let's keep working. And anyway, okay, there's a lot of Ann Arbor stuff going on in there. I appreciate that. So anyway, so I'm not like, it's funny to think of, I'm not necessarily a pioneer, but I feel like there's been a lot of people who have paved the way before me that I've been able to come up, but there's a lot of first stuff that I've been a part of. So I think one of my biggest goals when it comes to anything to do with DEI is we got to stop having firsts, right? This has got to become a real thing for all of us, that it's not a first thing anymore. A lot of you have heard me say this before. I'll say it again, and I'm probably going to say it again even today. For me, diversity, equity, inclusion is not, we talk about this as like a job or tasks or things to be done or stuff that we have to do and we have to focus on, which is all true. But to me, it's not a task. It is a value. DEI and everything about it is an underpinning of everything we do. It is not an addition to what we do. It is everything we do. And even as Jane said, making sure that you're building your leadership teams to reflect the diversity of your community or what your community looks like, that's just that should be so basic that we shouldn't even have to say that anymore. We're working on I feel like I'm consistently and constantly working on being intentional about diversity and inclusion when it comes to hiring. For example, my executive team is 10 people and 6 of them are women, which is awesome, including my public works director and a couple of which is not necessarily that tends to not be a job that women are known for, if you will, but we people of color and women in our organization, we want to boost that up and we want to be intentional about it, because again, talent is widespread, but opportunity isn't. And so it's our job as leaders to make sure that that opportunity is presented. And that, again, it's not that you're checking off a list, it's that you're making sure that this is the foundation of everything you do. And one of the things I'm very proud of is in 2021, I was appointed as one of the inaugural fellows of the ICMA Leadership Institute on Race, Equity, and Inclusion. And part of that is some of what I'll talk about, some of what we've learned later on, and some of the things that I was able to put together to take to my organization. For me, and this is unlike some other cities that are big cities that have they can have managers or they can have a task force or those sorts of things. As a small city, I don't really have a ton of resources to devote specifically to that. So that's even more important for us to make sure that we're promoting this value within everything we do, because I will never be able to hire a specific DEI manager, right? I don't have that type of resources. So therefore, all of us have to be DEI managers in our own way. And so that's one of the things that I'm continuing to learn. It's an honor to be asked to be on this panel, but I certainly don't have all the answers. I'm going to learn from all of you as much as I hope you learn from me today. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. Well, and to round out our panel today, we have Danya Perry, reigning from Wake County, North Carolina. For those of you who attended our session last year about breaking the barriers, David Ellis, the county manager over there, spoke about his first hire of a DEI director to take care of a better wake. And so I introduce you to Danya.
Good afternoon. Wow. I mean, Karen, Noel, Jane, I mean, I'm over here snapping, giving affirmations. Wow. This has really been truly been an honor just hearing you all and getting lost in your voice. But I will start off with me saying that my blood boils for justice, and it wasn't an accident. My mother, who grew up in the segregated South, she was one of the first four young ladies of color that actually integrated her high school. And so you're talking about in the 60s, and if you can imagine historically going from Plessy versus Ferguson all the way to Brown versus Board of Education, and having to have local conversations that Black communities had about how do you actually apply this law. When we talk about 1964, the Civil Rights Act and what was enacted then, and the application of that law actually operationalized and actualized in 1971. And so I remember my mother having conversations with her friends while growing up, and my son says, back when I was growing up, it was around 1990, 94 where I graduated from high school, but my son says it's the late 1900s. I don't like that kid. I love him, but I don't like him. But I recall, hearing my mother talk about that experience and talking about how the conversation and the decision of the community at that time, the Black community, was whether or not they should actually allow their kids to go into the white high school. And there was a choice. And those elders in the community understood that that choice was going to be one that was going to be historical just for that community. And it was going to maybe create more inroads and access to resources that the Black high school did not have. But they also knew that they were actually putting their children in danger. And it was a knowledge of that. And it was an understanding that they would have to send in young people that had the fortitude and the resilience to be able to navigate a situation like that. I tell you this story because when my mother shared about her experiences, her and her three friends at the time, seems like the elders said, ultimately, we're going to do this work. If we're going to do it, we have to be strategic. And so instead of sending all the kids within the Black high school to the white high school, they said, let's just send a small amount so that we can become less threatening. The second strategy was, let's also make sure that we send young girls, because hopefully that they would actually receive less abuse than if we brought young men. And then the third strategy was, what we're also going to do is we're going to make sure that the kids every single day, they dressed in their Sunday best as to not appear as a threat. And so every single day my mother did those things. And now the thing that those elders also talked about in that strategy was, we have to make sure that the young ladies that they send, they can hold their own. And so they didn't send the honor roll kids. They didn't send the 4 young ladies who were the most academically gifted. They sent 4 gangsters. And I say that affectionately. My mother hated school and she loved to fight. And so they sent in young ladies that were equipped and prepared to be able to deal with the onslaught of negativity and physical abuse that they were going to receive. My grandfather even sharpened his letter opener and gave it to my mother and said, if anybody mess with you, put this behind their ear and walk them down to the principal's office. Those stories I grew up with. These are stories that, a lot of us have either read in history books, or if you had an opportunity to sit with folks that have lived it. These are all important conversations that led us to where we are right now. Being able to serve as the county's first director of DEI is something I do not take for granted. There was a lot of people before us that created this opportunity and space to have this honest conversation from this perspective. There's a lot of people in the graveyard right now that lay because of their sacrifices, and I do not take that for granted. My work started out with wanting to get into international law and do my civil rights work with the UN. And I really, honestly, coming out of college, felt like I could actually figure out world peace. I could be the one, because nobody else wasn't doing it right. I needed to be the one. that can come up with that. And I had an opportunity to attend a conference in Boston at Boston University. And I had a chance to sit and break bread with Dr. Cornell West. And I remember him talking about his impassioned plea for how law changed us, civility changed us, and how you can actually use law as a way to bend it towards equity and justice, and how our world has been the foundational of equity work. Like literally our country's history has been equity work, right? Trying to live up to that notion of equality. And I remember him as he was telling me all these things, he gave me two pieces of advice. He said, one, he said, be able to read and take anything that anybody has ever published around the topic, read it, and then being able to convey it and communicate it to the layperson, make things practical. And then the second thing he told me was to make sure you always stay connected to those that are most marginalized, that are doing, that are being impacted by systems that are creating disparities. And so that has been the foundation of the work for Wake County as we've launched this work. In 2018, our community had a reckoning of sorts. We wanted to talk about, as we grew, we acknowledged that, you know, the rising tide, obviously we thought would raise all boats, but some of the boats were not seaworthy. And so we had to have an honest conversation about inclusive prosperity and equitable economic development, which led to having conversations about systems that created the disparity, and no longer the analysis on people, but we had to do the analysis on the systems at large. And so in 2018, we started working towards, as a community, both public and private entities, trying to problem solve around what this looks like. And so I'm excited to be able to launch our county's role in this work as we create inclusive prosperity. We've been around since January 2022, so we're still relatively new. But I will say that we are standing on the backs and the shoulders of many folks before us. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. I appreciate all those who are also allies in this space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we're going to get into the Q&A session, and we have a few prepared questions here, and we're going to kick it off with one of the themes that I heard from all of you about the importance of building a team reflective of your community. And Jane, you spoke a bit about how you wouldn't sign off on one of the orders. So maybe if you could kick off the question of how do you build a team reflective of your community, and we'll hear from our panelists. So thanks, Jane.
Well, thanks, Juniper. I mean, I think the way to do it is, number one, you got to know your community. And so in Cleveland, which is my town, so we all tell stories about where we're from, we have a number of community development corporations, which are neighborhood based. And there, a lot of leadership gets developed because they're nonprofit organizations that are working on, some are working on crime, some are working on housing development, some are working on, you know, trying to get a grocery store into the area because it's a food desert. And so people learn to develop leadership and they get engaged. So there's a lot of opportunity to look to leadership there. We also really were intentional about looking at the different departments and who was being served and who was being challenged. For instance, one of the things I looked at was we have a law department and a city prosecutor. And I told you that our community was majority African-American. And when I looked at the city prosecutor's office, we had one African-American. And I said, that is not suitable. We're going to have to do better than that. And so I basically said to my law director, I want you to go to the Norman Minor Bar Association. I want you to go and find African-American candidates. And they did. And so the fact is that if you're really intentional about looking for the right people, you can find them. Sometimes people will say, it's just easier. I know this one, but that's how the same people run everything.
Great, thank you. Karen, you mentioned a bit of that in your intro part. What have you applied to build your team?
Yeah, so I think just as Jane said, being intentional is really critical. And that starts at the very beginning when we're talking about like putting together the job description, right? What is it that are we on, when you talk about thinking about equity and all of the things of what that's supposed to mean, it's got to, I mean, it's a systemic issue. So you got to look at the system, start with the job description. Is this going to unwittingly leave people out? Is this, education, experience, that type of thing? Are we, unintentionally biasing ourselves toward a certain group of people? So that's where one of it starts. And then in the hiring group, and you look at some of that stuff, and it's really interesting because I'm of two minds on this, right? You've heard the stories about how if you don't put names on the resume and you just look at the resume, it's different than if you see the names on the resume, right? Because there could be different cultural things that, someone's name or how it's spelled or something like that. But on the flip side, if I can somewhat tell that there are, people that might not be the typical people that would apply for such a job, like if it's a woman for an engineering job, for example, or, a person of color coming up into management that where I don't have someone, I also might want to try to look for some of that. I mean, and I'm not even afraid to say that because I'm fine with being intentional. You want to make the pool as wide as possible so that you can take that real look and give people that chance. And then and actually what I just said, giving people a chance. So I remember once upon a time when I started back in Oak Park, Michigan, I did not have a master's degree. I had no business applying for that job. And yet my city manager took a chance on me because I had a customer service skill set that he really liked. I was working in retail at the time while I put myself through school, and he wanted someone in his office that had good customer service skills. And here I am. I mean, sometimes you have to take a chance on someone who might not have that traditional path that you're looking for, or has a skill set that you can use in another way. I mean, you really have to be intentional. You have to dig deep. You can't just look at the resume, look at the school they went to, look at the name, look at their experience. That's all important. But at the end of the day, you really have to try to look beneath the surface and try to figure out what's best for your organization. And if I need more people of color in my organization to, if I can't serve, you can't be what you can't see, and you can't serve people well if you don't have the perspectives of the people you're serving. So it's just really, again, it's just being super intentional and going as deep as you can to try to come up with different ways to really to maximize the perspectives you have on your team, that you can provide better service to everyone that you're serving.
Thank you, Karen. Noelle, would you like to add to this conversation?
Sure. Great stuff. I think the other piece that I would add is that data is powerful. I think data tells a story, and data can be used to determine where we fall short as an organization. I think for us, for example, one of the things that I'm proud of is Adams County found issues with pay equity amongst genders, and we decided to tackle that, and we've closed the gap over I would say the last maybe 5 years, since 2019, I believe. And so I came in while this was already an established practice, but supporting that and being part of that decision-making process to close the gap on what remained and adjusting some of those percentages. I'll tell you that I had some emails and messages from staff that was impacted, our female staff primarily, thanking us for their support. So I think the building a team that's reflective, but then also taking care of them once they're on board. Because I think what can happen, and I share that example because when we meet the mark that we're looking to meet, whatever that is, it's also how we're taking care of them while they're on the board, while on board. So it's recruitment, and then there's the retention piece. So I think that's also where we can fall short of we're meeting certain metrics, but then we might be failing. That's the diversity and inclusion connection, right? Where pay equity addresses inclusion, not quite as the diversity piece, because we have been moving the needle in that direction. I think for us also, it's understanding what are the kind of the watershed moments that are going on within your organization. So for us, 2020 was a significant census year because at that point we became a majority minority county. So I think it's understanding how to galvanize support behind those salient issues that are happening within the community, because We are an organic, living, breathing organism as a community, as an organization. So it's also understanding that we're tackling things that will change over time. So how are we ensuring that we're evolving our practices and continually, recalibrating as we go?
Thank you. This brings me back to the conversation with David last year, who talked about intention. And so maybe Danya, if you could share a little bit about how Wake County is addressing this.
No, absolutely. I mean, ditto to all that's really that folks have presented. Noel, I'm with you in terms of that data. One of the things that we recognize that, as an organization and an enterprise within a burgeoning city and community, I mean, we're competing for the best and the brightest. And to be able to do so, we have to ensure that we're creating a culture where people want to be. So we actually created a couple opportunities to hear from the voices of some of our millennials and Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, and ask them about what is their value proposition to work. And one of the things that we heard in the thread that we heard across the board was meaning over money. It was meaning over money. And so for them, it was about a place that felt as if they could see themselves there. They could feel like they can bring their entire selves to work, that they could see themselves also as a place where they know that the work, there's meaning within the work, and that it's not just going to be about me coming in and punching in the clock. And that's certainly not the workforce that some of our elders have been exposed to. And so that being the case, this becomes sort of an ROI of DEI, in terms of our employee base, and why it's important to make sure that we create spaces that's going to, be incredibly equitable. The two big buckets for us that we really focus in on is one, interpersonal. That's how do we as colleagues work across difference? And how can we be courageous in having honest conversations about things like race, which in all honesty, I mean, it's probably the most hardest conversation to have. And if I'm being honest, I mean, I blame, I had an experience in a grocery store with my son who was 6 years old, and we're going down this aisle, and there was approaching from the other side of a white mother with a child that looks like he was about the same age. And they were both sitting in the little buggies. And as they passed, the little young male white child pointed at my son and said, "Mommy, is he brown because he drinks chocolate milk?" And, and what do you think the mom said in that particular moment? Anybody? Oh, shh, shh, shh. We don't talk about that. And the kid was making an observation and trying to figure out how does this fit in their worldview. And that was an amazing opportunity to talk about melanin, and to talk about brownness, and to talk about how we are all different and same at the same place. And I think that represented sort of our notion of being colorblind. And so being colorblind means that we don't make decisions based on any other personal identifier. But the honesty part about it is that we just don't talk about it because of the emotion, the trauma, history is complex. But we have to normalize that conversation, because these people, and collectively, the being us, are gatekeepers to systems that need to change. And so I used to fight against Juniper, talking about our work is about changing the hearts and minds of people. I used to really fight against that. But I understand that that has to work lock and step with what we're doing. So I have to be able to unthaw and normalize our gatekeepers to our budgetary process, to our human resources team, to our communications teams. And then how do we start looking at how they do their work after they've unthawed, to say, when I make decision, who benefits and who's burdened? Have I engaged the community to understand this decision being made in order to get also different perspectives? When I look at my data, where are my opportunities for these equity goals? And let's end performative allyship, right? Just putting something on social media and saying, happy Juneteenth, but actually looking at your data and seeing, do you have underrepresentation within leadership, top tier leadership, all the way down? So, that's sort of the foundation, Juniper, of how we want to go about the work. And those are the two big buckets that we center on.
Great, thank you. I think that we have several practical solutions here. So going into, our next question for you all spoke about your community history, personal history. What we'd like to learn a little bit more about is how does the community history play a role in your programming? And so, Danya, if you wouldn't mind kicking that off.
As you can probably tell, my daddy was a preacher, so I apologize for being so loquacious. I'll start with this. When we get into talking about moving this work forward, we have to acknowledge that you have to truly understand the history of the marginalized communities in your neighborhood, in your community, in your county, in your city at large. There's this amazing TED Talk by Ernesto Ceroli. And he has his TED Talk is titled "Shut Up and Listen." And he's saying before we go into communities, there's this sort of this notion between world makers versus space takers. And so oftentimes we may see ourselves as making the world for those that sometimes are considered to be taking up space. And so by understanding history, we have to acknowledge those folks that sometimes are seen as space takers. What is their story? What is their background? What is the background behind this neighborhood? Because if we continue to assume that we're making world is a better place for said individuals, we're missing an opportunity. And so being able to amplify the voices of the folks that are historically underrepresented, to give space and give up our own power and position to folks who may not have had a voice up to this point. Now, I will say that those who, when we talk about our history, you want to engage the community to understand the history. Those who traditionally been outside of the spaces of making decisions and power, we are starting from a deficit if you start today. So you're going to receive some pushback. I just want to go ahead and just say you will receive pushback, and you will get that sort of sense of, are you really here because you want me to be a part of the solution, or is it really about tokenism? Or is it really about, so we have to think about, we're having a conversation about potentially how do we have our community more engaged in a meaningful way in our budget process, right? And, I know some of our neighboring communities have dabbled into participatory budgeting, but the history, understanding the history and raising the voices of those in our community is critical to really truly understanding the lived experiences of those in our community.
Thank you. Noelle, you talked a bit about the history of your community as well. If you could share your insights.
Yeah, I think it's a best practice to know your community's history regardless. I think there's a lot to learn, and I, personally have found a way to dive deeper into the history of whatever community I've been serving, because there's always something to learn. And then more specifically within DEI, I think DEI, we're talking here about leading from an organizational level, kind of an inside out approach. What can we do within the organization? What can we do as we engage the organization? I think the history is important because there's different ways, there are different levers, different ways to start your journey from a DEI standpoint, but you also will benefit from the history because sometimes, and some of us have been in situations where DEI issues came from the outside in because there were community issues. We know about some national incidents, but you'll have a better idea about what could be manifested within your community that you can be better prepared and better understand how to address. For example, I've been in communities that are immigrant communities. One was a border town, my most recent experience. So not understanding the dynamics that come with that. Also, there are Civil War history. We had a situation in 2020 where there was still the lone standing Civil War remnant of Jefferson Davis at one of our parks that was being revitalized. It was one of our prominent central parks in downtown, and there stood Jefferson Davis still. And the community, asked the question of what does this still symbolically say about our community? But it's understanding that component because that blew up in a way. So here we are. It wasn't part of the parks programming, but it became part of the project because we had to remove it and take care of that because the community expressed where we've moved on as a community. We're not in the Civil War era here, and they didn't have as much, I don't want to say respect, but they didn't feel that value still reflected the community as it stood today. I think also is one of the other challenges that we as a community took on with the leadership of our mayor and council was the issue of digital equity or broadband, understanding that the community where I was at was one of the 5th most disconnected cities in the country for populations of over 150,000. We jumped all over that lever, so to speak, even before the pandemic, and we knew that that was going to resonate with the community, and we had 82% support from our community back in 2019, because it was clear that we were underserved from a broadband perspective. So it's when you understand who you serve, what is the lowest common denominator in your community, there is likely a greater possibility that you'll be effective when you start your DEI journey.
Thank you, Noel. And Jane, you talked about a few historical milestones in Cleveland, if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts on this.
Well, Cleveland is a fascinating community. Cleveland was, one of the 10 largest cities. John D. Rockefeller made a good portion of his money there, funded the art museum and the symphony orchestra. We have the best band in the land. And what's happened is that the core of the city, people have left the core of the city, moved into the suburban communities. And then the core of the city still, until maybe the 80s, had Fortune 500, headquarters there. And gradually that began to fall away. Our manufacturing base began to fall away. So understanding these communities, and there are a number of neighborhoods to this day where people grew up, they watched their, now it's grandparents who had a high school education, maybe didn't, walked to the factory. The factory was a unionized factory. They had a good job. They were able to buy a home. They were able to go on vacation. They were able to send their kids to college. And the grandma and grandpa are still in the house. But what's happened is, as the factories have left, the decay has gone, more people have moved in. We had then the Great Migration from the South, where, when Jim Crow laws went crazy, and so people thought, okay, I'm going to go to the North thinking that's, the nirvana. It didn't actually turn out that way. And we had amazing, transformation of communities. From one Black family would move in, the realtors would say there's a Black family moving in, sell your house, and neighborhoods, streets would change in the course of a month. And so we have now the east side and the west side of the Cuyahoga River are very different. Although now the east side is more traditionally Black. It was originally, solid middle class. Now, not so much. The west side was more white. And as the redevelopment and the gentrification has gone on, the west side is gentrifying and redeveloping much more quickly than the east side. Let me tell you, racism is not dead. It's still very much alive and part of our community. And so you have to know that history and also understand why some of the people who've been in these communities forever and ever they're frustrated. Yes, there's the racism is horrible, but you also have to recognize that for some of these older white people, the fact that their kids can't make it is great pain. So you've got the economic challenges that cut across. And then we've had our education system has not been stellar. And so it doesn't matter whether you're Black, blue, green, whatever, you left town because you wanted your kids to be in a better, and our suburbs are very close. Unlike the city of Columbus, which is our neighbor to the south, which required that in order to get water, you had to annex into the city. So Franklin County, where Columbus is, has 1 million people. 850,000 are in the city of Columbus. Cuyahoga County has 1.4 million and 57 communities.
Collaboration. Wonderful. Well, we've heard a lot about kind of the historical aspects, and, we really want to be looking forward as well. And so we haven't received any questions from the audience. So what I'd like to hear from each of our panelists, and we'll start with Karen, some of the forward thinking about what strategies you're currently using along the lines of partnerships, what advice you would share with the audience for those looking to make an impact, and then really how you would describe the future of DEI. And we'll start with you, Karen.
Okay, so as I said, we're a small city. We're 25,000 square miles, so we're really tiny, but small but mighty. So again, how do I do this? How do I do this the right way? And I have to say that for El Cerrito, I'll just use our example, and I know there's a lot of small cities out there, and when I was in the cohort for the Leadership Institute, this was actually my biggest focus, was how, as a small city, can I do this meaningfully and in a good way? So El Cerrito has historically been very welcoming. Like I said earlier, we're about 48% white, but the rest, actually, my second largest ethnic group is Asian American. And as you've seen some of the issues that have gone on with the AAPI community recently, it's been a big, huge focus for us. We have probably about 10% Black, about 7 or 8% Hispanic. So we're very mixed diversity wise all across the spectrum. But again, some of the ethnic groups that we will want to focus on, that we want to try to be inclusive of, and there's a language barrier, there's immigrants, that come in, and, all of those things. So those are all things we have to try to focus on. So we've kind of done it in pieces. And what I want to try to do, and this is what my team and I are continuing to work on, is kind of try to pull it together in some sort of a little bit more of a formal way of an equity plan, since we have this as one of our values in our strategic plan, and we've already done a whole lot of stuff. We have, events, we have programs. One of the biggest things, and this is maybe a tip if you don't have one, we have a Human Relations Commission that has been seated for decades. And years ago, they started to pop up, particularly in California, to try to help with things like hate crimes, or to help to kind of identify hate crimes, and working in conjunction with the police department. Now that hate crimes are codified in California law, that sort of duty of theirs fell away, but the commission has remained. And what we have, and I was their staff liaison as an assistant city manager for several years. They put on listening sessions, they put on diversity panels and forums, community events that we've worked with. We have a big MLK rally and parade every single year, and that's kind of their focus, is to try to provide that education and all of those things to pull the community together. So we've relied on our Human Relations Commission as community volunteers to kind of be our ambassadors in the community and to inform us what's going on in the community. So if you don't have a commission or a task force or anything like that, it does take staff work, but that is a really great way to integrate some of the community spirit that you can hear directly from. And because they're a part of the city infrastructure, that they have they have the ability to serve as those commissioners. So we have really relied on our Human Relations Commission. We have had these values, like I said, through our strategic plan and all of our goals and strategies through each of the departments. So what I would like to do now, and what our council has actually tasked us to do, is to come up with a way that on our agenda reports. So you all do agenda reports, right? You've got, your background, your analysis, your financial considerations. We're going to be adding equity considerations to each staff report, so that it's making our staff think, and what it is that you have to, like, you're going to sign a contract to, clean up a park. Well, are there equity considerations? Are you cleaning up which park, and who's going to serve the most people? Those types of things. We do want to take that step back and make sure we're all defining equity the same way, because you'd be surprised at how many definitions of equity can actually be out there, especially in the community. And some of you are laughing, and that's so true. So we're working on that together as a team. And one of the things we did initiate that, and again, this is a little bit of budget that we've been able to do, is that we've initiated a lot of big training. We're working with a team out of Oakland, and that is a consultant that is working with us to help train some of our teams and kind of pull all of that together. So it does take a little bit of resources, but we can do it in a way where it's you know, let's just be honest, it's affordable, that it's something that our city can actually put into its budget, but also that it's meaningful, not just for the staff, but for the community to be able to come together and continue to build on this. It's like I said, we all have to be DEI managers, and that is just really something that we're just going to continue to infuse into our organization, so that as we're providing these services to everyone else, we've got to start at the core, which is us, and so that we can engage the community meaningfully, and that we're all speaking the same language. So that's what we're working on. So maybe next year I'll have more more tales to share, but that is currently what we're up to in El Cerrito, and we're working really hard. And again, it's just being intentional and being real, and it's amazing what happens when you actually pay attention to something.
Great, thank you, Karen. And Noelle, your thoughts on the future?
Excuse me, I'll talk on the advice question and then looking forward. I think that my first piece of advice would be is to practice some due diligence and just research the organization that you are seeking to join or that you're part of. Look at what they stand for. For example, us as a county, we come right out, and in our vision statement, we state how our vision is to be the most innovative and inclusive county in America. So it's when you look at your organization that you're at, what are their values? Where do they prioritize DEI as part of their culture? Look at their vision, their mission, their culture, their norms, values. And then hopefully they also tie it to their strategy, structure, and systems, where they put money behind what they state and that they model and live what they're saying. Here in Adams, and this goes back to Karen's point, we believe that DEI has to be the main portion of the work that we do, and all the other things fall within this concept. We believe that DEI is the top of the umbrella, and the umbrella has many different handles, like finance and social services and transportation, but DEI permeates everything we do. We just get to incorporate DEI in everything else. It has to be the entree. DEI cannot be the side dish. And I think those are the things that I look at. So some more practical things that I would share is sometimes we complicate DEI work. Yes, there's DEI competencies, there are DEI certifications, and there's terms and things to understand. But I always tell people that the best qualification to take part in DEI work is your personal story. Don't try to boil the ocean. Start with who you are, and exercise some personal leadership and share your story, because your lived experience qualifies you better than any DEI certification in my mind, because who you are, when you share your story, you're going to unlock the possibilities of building genuine relationships with people who you have commonalities with, but they'll never know, and you'll never know unless you share your story, your professional journey, your personal journey. You'll have instant credibility when you share your story, because that's unique to you, and others will likely relate to you, and you can start to see how you can build bridges with others at the most basic human level. Because this is about people. The other thing I would say is research the issues and the contexts that are affecting your community and affecting your organization. For example, when I was in Capel, we did a program called Allies in Community. We did that proactively because the East and South Asian community had become more than 20% of our population. And we wanted to get ahead of that and begin to allow our service delivery and our programming to be reflective of how we could better serve that community. I shared the Brownsville story, being one of the 5th most disconnected communities from a broadband perspective. I shared how we are the majority minority county in Adams. ICMA, we've shared how we have an 18% of women in public administration professions. Understand that, use those as levers to galvanize that support and build a business case, so to speak. I would also say start with your circle of control and then grow your circle of influence. This is a Covey principle, but what I would always say is there's an exercise called the diversity wheel. You all might be familiar with this, but it talks about how we all have primary and secondary characteristics or dimensions that define us. We sometimes limit ourselves to the primary things, people that look like us, that went to the same school as us, go to the same church. When you start talking to people, you find that you connect at so many different levels. The 4 levels of diversity dimensions are internal, external, organizational, and worldview. But it goes back to sharing your story, building connections, because that is the only way you're going to unlock how much deeper and further you connect with people when you start to open up. And finally, I would say commit to DEI now, so that when you see growth in your profession, your circle of influence will grow because of the positional responsibilities that you'll have. And you'll, even if the organization you're in today doesn't espouse DEI or doesn't give you that opportunity, or when you grow, you'll be able to change that. But you have to commit today. You can't commit once you're the city manager, once I'm the director. No, start today. And as you grow in your career, keep exercising that DEI platform.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. You had amazing stories to tell today, and hopefully our attendees were able to take some of these practical lessons. We have so much more to talk about, but our time is up. So thank you to ICMA.
That's right, Juniper. Thank you for putting together this amazing panel. I forgot earlier I was on camera when Jane was talking about the reporter. It's what a crazy story. I loved it. So you just saw a survey pop up. Please finish those surveys. I want to thank you. Please come back tomorrow, everyone. Day 2 kicks off at 11 a.m. Eastern. And this is something fun I did earlier today. And if you missed it, we're going to do it for you now. So usually it's like a virtual round of applause. I'm going to count to 3. And we're going to unmute. And everyone's going to go, yeah, because it was just amazing. Okay. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3.
Yay!
Good job.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
We will see you all tomorrow. Thanks again.
Bye-bye. Thank you.